Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the last broadcast of the day at Rutgers NJIT or NJIT. Yes, it's so tough. I should just start saying New Jersey Institute of Technology rather than try to do the acronym. But yeah, this is the last broadcast of the day. Feel free to retweet any questions if you're watching it afterwards to the Scicomm Monday handle. Follow along with everything that's been happening here at the Rutgers NJIT Scicomm hashtag. And then if you've got any questions afterwards for me, feel free to also tweet me at my personal handle, Wildlife BioGal. So for our last broadcast, we've got Stephanie Mafla-Mills. I got that right? Okay, I was like after messing up the last one. But yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your academic background, like how you got to like where you are now?
So I kind of took the very long route. I was initially like a pre-med major. My first bachelor's is actually in political science. I was interested in environmental policy.
Yeah.
And I spent some time in the nonprofit world outside of St. Louis, and was really disheartened by how hard it is to get science-based policy in through legislators.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of times us scientists don't necessarily think about. And hello there to India. That's great.
Hi.
We didn't realize that's where you're from. He's been communicating with us several
nice.
times over the broadcast, and I didn't realize that's where you were communicating from. So great. Nice to see you. But yeah, the political science is, I think, a really interesting take on things, because a lot of times we just do our science and we don't necessarily think about how that science gets translated to actual like legislation and action out in the public.
Sure.
One of my roommates through grad school was actually a political science graduate student, and she always like gave me a hard time for the fact that, oh well, you go do your science, but we're the ones who actually determine what happens afterwards. And so it's neat that you've got that knowledge base of both of those disciplines, so you can kind of like communicate from the science through the policy making aspect of it. So
definitely, it's a struggle. I can definitely see from that especially if you have legislators that don't believe the science. It's
which
more,
we are seeing it. It seems like a lot of it right
very
now.
relevant right now. But it's really important that you know who those candidates are and their stance on things like science or what kind of policies they'll make, because they can either choose to ignore it or not. So that was a little bit more than I wanted to take on, and I decided I wanted to be back on the research end and leave the lobbying and a lot of the really hard work to people who had more heart in it. So I went back to a community college and I did the prereqs. I went to University of Missouri St. Louis to get my bachelor's in actual biology. And then I was able to meet mentors Dr. Nathan Muchala and Dr. Godfrey Bourne. They work in Ecuador and in Guyana. They were able to give me a chance to get back to actually my roots. My dad's from Ecuador, my mom's from the Philippines. And I learned through them that I would be able to actually do field ecology, work in the field, work on those sites that are losing a lot of forests, and try to do some research there to kind of quantify what's the value in those forests and in those lands, because they're up against really big hurdles there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take, like, being able to go back to like where your families are from and to be able to like help out those, because like when you're working in like those non like what we call like first world countries or whatever, like the resources that they have to be able to protect that native habitat seems, at least from what I've seen, and I don't know what it is that you've seen, it seems to be a lot lower. And so like, have you seen that? Like what are the resources to be able to help protect all of that? Is it there? Like, is there that drive to do the science in those areas?
So I think it's kind of multifaceted, like most problems are. But if we're thinking in terms of economics and what makes the world go around, money, those, I like to call them nature nations. But those places have the least amount of economic power, right? So yes, if they're up against oil companies that want to drill in the forests, and that president or leader thinks, well, yes, those millions of dollars that I can bring in from this part of land is going to help my country more than right now. The forests don't bring in a lot of money. Right. So Mother Nature isn't saying, well, look at my Disneyland that I can have everybody come to, and it's worth this much money compared to the oil that is fleeting. But in terms of, like, especially indigenous populations, they value that land.
Right.
It's just they don't have the economic power to say, this is our land, this is important to us for this reasons, or this feeds this many people, or this puts most of our village to work on this land. They don't have that. So that takes a lot of, I hope, the community, the connections that we have in our generation to be able to connect the whole world. People talk about globalization really in ugly terms sometimes, but that's a really powerful thing too, to be able to kind of showcase people who are doing good, especially in like a very indigenous or traditional way, and to say that this is their home. Like, how dare we, as people who need more oil or more chocolate or what have you, that we should be able to say, well, let's cut down that forest and use it for our own.
Right. I mean, as much as I love my chocolate, it's not worth destroying someone's home that they use to be able to survive. Oh, and ultimately, we need it to survive too, because without that, like, it's going to impact us up here too. So yeah, I found that like interesting, like when you're saying about globalization, how it can be effective to help people out. So it's you're like have family that was in the Philippines and Ecuador, like you're able to maybe like see what might have worked in one of those nations and be able to possibly apply it to another. Has there been like any of those instances that you've seen so far, or like anything that you think that would translate? I mean, they're on the other side of the world from each other, but they do have a lot of similarities too. It's surprising how much they have in common. The Philippines being an island and Ecuador having one of the most famous islands, the Galapagos, they've both been colonized by Spain, so there's a lot of the legacies of colonization that leave people at a disadvantage, and it's been the indigenous people that are at this disadvantage. But they both have had a lot of Western influence, meaning more American influence. So they've both had bases there. They've both had a lot of commerce. Ecuador actually has just recently transferred over to the American dollar as their currency. Really? Okay.
So you can go down there, you can shop everything with American money. You can still shop with
Hashtag Nicole's trip to Ecuador 2017.
So they do have a lot of connections to the developed world, and you can see where a lot of that kind of empowers people to say, we want the same kind of equity. We want this for especially our forests, our natural resources. There's a lot of places in both countries that are trying to capitalize on ecotourism, and I really hope that's something that kind of takes off, because that's really the only way that you can engage people and empower people that are there living in that land, but still, how do you funnel in some kind of economic prowess, right? How do you get that capital in their hands without, again, using the forest as a product?
Right. I mean, it's very easy to tell them, well, don't destroy the forest to put in a farm, when we're not the ones who are relying on that land to be able to feed ourselves, but if you're living there and it's like, well, how do I put bread into my mouth? It's a whole nother issue.
Exactly.
So when you're in these forests, what is it that you're actually studying while you're there?
So I've been really lucky. In Ecuador, I was able to study nectivorous bats. So that's like a lot of what Kathleen does, and she puts up the mist nets. It's late at night. You spend the whole day hiking to the sites, and you put up the nets. So they're very thin nets, and the bats can't echolocate off of them, so they don't actually know they're there, because they have great echolocation, right? But they'll actually fly into them, you catch them, and we were doing fecal analysis, so we would...
hashtag science poop, everyone.
There
you go. Look up the hashtag. It's really great. You'll enjoy it. So, and the next time you're out, I expect some bat poop with the hashtag science tab. Tweet it out.
I will tweet it to you. Okay. But you keep them for like an hour or two. They'll poop, and then we can analyze their poop. So it was basically what we were trying to do on that study was to see how much actual variety, diversity is in their diet. So we were expecting that the nectivorous bats would, drink mostly nectar, and they would have very few insect meals. And so we found that for a lot of them, we actually found that one that was kind of out of its range had more insects in its diet than we expected. And what we were thinking is this one being out of its range, being away from its normal area, is actually using the insects to sustain itself where it normally wouldn't be. So it's like it needed more energy. Not necessarily
the flowers there for it to feed upon, and so it's going to like that secondary food source, you think?
Exactly. Well, that's what we're thinking, and so we're still working on that analysis and everything.
Do you think maybe it's like secondary collection, like, so maybe as they're feeding on the flower that there might be the insects in there, or are these like insects that you're not necessarily finding in the flowers, and so that makes you think they might have been switching
right
their food
so these
source?
would have had to be, these are mostly Lepidoptera, so mostly moths, that they would have actually had to catch and get themselves. We did think about secondary stuff that would have probably been a different insect. So that's what we were thinking, was they must be really looking after these ones. The second trip I had a chance to go on was to Guyana. That's actually where I met my current advisor with my mentor from my undergrad, Dr.
And where is Guyana for like the folks who don't know?
Right, so it's very close to Ecuador. We're still in South America. I had a lot of questions about Ghana, and Ghana would be in Africa. Guyana is, if we're coming into South America from Panama, you're coming into Colombia. Next to Colombia would be Venezuela. Next to Venezuela would be Guyana. So we're just a little bit north of Brazil. And they have actually some of the greatest contiguous forests still intact, and some of the greatest primary forests. And
is it just because there's not a large population there, or are they just, there hasn't been the drive to go through the forest yet? Do you know the reasonings behind that?
I don't. I think it's probably a combo of the population's smaller, it's not as populated, and maybe it's because
I was totally assuming the population was smaller, so it's like it's not a well-known country, or at least not in like my circles of things that I know. So.
Geography, a little hidden secret. I think they're also just untapped resources yet, so it's not that they won't be gone, because there is clearing that's happening. So it might kind of accelerate as they find more, and that's generally what happens, right? Like you find a source, especially an oil reserve or something, and then they go in. In Guyana, we were studying termites and catching odonates, so dragonflies and damselflies. I'm in an entomology lab, so we caught insects at night, we caught insects during the day, and insects are a great organism to study ecology and evolution. They don't take up a lot of space, so we see a lot of diversity within the insects there, and they're great for kind of studying that stuff.
So, like when we were talking before the broadcast, you were saying like there's a huge diversity of insects in those forests there. Like how, like, I mean, when you say great diversity, like how does that compare to maybe some of the forest up here in North America where we're at now? Like, is it like 10 times more or 100 times more? Like, what's your best guess, like, to put you on the spot?
I would definitely say in orders of hundreds or thousands of magnitude. That's like somebody once said, I can't remember who it was, but that if there was a god, he was a beetle lover, because the most diverse insect there is in the world is a beetle. And to study in that area, you would be studying species. People will come back with species that have never been described, because there's so many. So there's a vast variety of them, mainly because insects are small. They don't need a lot of space, right? They don't need a lot of resources. Because the tropics also have the greatest diversity in plants, you're also going to see those species that are also specific to like certain plants, right?
So they're like,
so they can also diversify. It's kind of like a co-evolution type thing. And they're the only invertebrates that can fly. Like, so they can kind of get away from areas that might be not as habitable. They can find more resources that they might need, maybe if a certain area is gone. And they have the ability to have like a dormancy stage, those diapause where they can pause in their their growth, and they reproduce like crazy. So if an area,
especially when they're infesting your home, it's like they go crazy.
So they're kind of the winners as far as evolution is concerned.
So we had a question come in, which actually was a question I was hoping to ask at some point in time. Even though you're in more of those tropical areas, are you seeing any impacts of climate change on those insects there? Because like you were saying, like with the bats, they're possibly switching their food sources. Do you think maybe climate change could possibly have an impact on that, even though you're still in kind of those areas like we don't really think of climate change having impacts, but it still impacts everything?
Without a doubt. I think when we're talking about changes, especially in when plants change flowering times, or when they're changing seeding, or anything that would have to do like with the herbivore plant interaction, you're going to have the cascade that happens. The insects are going to be the first ones to feel it. So they're actually good species. And when we talk about in terms of also water pollution or restoration of watersheds, they're great indicator species for things like that. You'll see that first. And I think why I really like to work on insects is the permitting is easier. No one cares as much about insects, I'm sure, as you can tell.
Easier, yes.
You can attest to.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can take a lot of them back. We can study them and see what are they eating, what's more nitrogen rich, what's more phosphorus rich. You can tell that interaction with the plant. But they'll be some of the first ones to let us know. So.
Yeah, so we had a question come in. Do you think if I remember right, do you think the resource, you know, the amount of resource diversity there is like leading to the diversity of, I'm assuming the insects is what was asked about. So like maybe if you can go into like all, like, 'cause I know you talked about like the number of different plants there. Like, are there other resources besides plants that the insects, you know, are able to take advantage there that like might contribute to their diversity?
Right. So if we're talking about them being small and not needing to actually move very far to find resources, that's like I think a huge key. So if insects don't have to migrate too far, we have insects that are you know, carnivorous, so they're looking for other insects. We'd have insects that are herbivores, so like we said, there's herbivore plant interactions, but then we also have detritivores. We have insects that feed, you know, like when we're talking about termites, if they're feeding on trees that are fallen, deciduous things, things that are decaying, they also have an abundance of that matter.
Yeah, because I mean, with that much life, there's got to be a lot of death that happens too, that, you know, is a good resource for them.
Exactly. So when you think of those different guilds, there's just so much. And even if you're talking just an acre, a hectare, a forest, there's so much that's available to something like an insect.
Yeah, because I mean, you think like just the biomass alone is there, and so we got someone giving a shout out in from Puerto Rico with the
Hola, Puerto Rico.
So glad you can join us. That's one of the best things I love about this, is all the people tuning in from all around the world. So if you have any questions about Stephanie's research in the tropical forest, definitely feel free to tweet it in. Anything about bats or insects, or even, I guess, policy stuff, since you also did political science. So yeah, feel free to send in those questions. We want to make this as engaging a format as possible. So so you've kind of like been all over the world. So we got a question, and I'll switch to this. Are we losing our diversity, and can you see this in the work that you do? So
I think what's great about some of the work that's been done in my lab, and I haven't, you know, been in the lab long enough, and I haven't been in the field long enough, other than, you know, my family is still in Ecuador and the Philippines. But when we collect samples and we date everything, and as scientists we put data to everything, right? When we collect those samples and bring them back, we can use that as baseline data or as continual data. My professor, my PI, has been going to Guyana for, I believe this will be her maybe 13th year. So she can say she's seen this dragonfly in this watershed, and maybe if we go back and we don't see it, we can definitively say, well, we haven't seen it now, right? And we used to see it X amount of times, or we used to see X number. And that's what I really love about science, because if somebody wants to argue or bring their stance forward and say, you know, there's no such thing, and even if there was a such thing, I don't think it really impacts us, or climate change doesn't affect anything, we can give them the black and white, we can give them the quantifiable data to say, well, this is what we found 10 years ago, this is what we found 5 years ago, this is what we found this year. And it's hard to dispute that when we're in the field. Right,
exactly. And then, like, you know, just to further on that question, there's a lot of talk about whether or not, here, I'm going to read this question here so I don't forget it, but there's talk about it being another extinction level event that we're currently going through right now. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that's really interesting is that people don't necessarily get the loss of life that's happening and the diversity out there. And one of the things that I learned in ecology, you know, through class was like that whole, like, you know, the rivets in a plane. You know, it's one of those old analogies that we have, like, you know, how many rivets do you take out of the plane before the plane crashes? Which I probably should be talking about since I'll be hopping on a plane tomorrow.
All the rivets will be there.
Oh yeah, it's totally good. No, I love flying. It's one of my favorite things to do. But yeah, it really is, like, you know, it's how many of those species can we lose before everything just crashes off? And like, how much is climate change accelerating that? How much is like all the other anthropogenic, or how much all that other human influence, such as cutting down the forest and stuff, contributing to that diversity loss?
Yeah, I think I'm sure you've heard the term, but for those who are watching, they're calling it the Anthropocene, right?
Right. Yes. Actually,
we're naming it after kind of our impact, human impact, as what this extinction is called. It's like nothing they've ever seen in history.
Right. Yeah. There's a conference that I'm running this Scicomm for the conference. It's American Ornithological Society. That's what their theme is for this year is, in the Anthropocene. And it's just like, it'll be very interesting to see all the talks. It's probably going to be very sad and depressing, but it's something that we need to talk about. So there's a question that came in from Tingo89, who I know is up there in Canada and Ontario. Hello, Tiana.
My advisors from Canada. Hello, Canada.
I love my Canadians. They're amazing.
Yeah,
Tiana's awesome. We had her on Scicomm Monday a little while back. So a great researcher up in Canada. So she was asking about how you combine. Hello. Yes. Hi. So she was asking, if I remember right, if I get this wrong, Tiana, feel free to send it back out to us. But how are you combining your political science and your like research now together to like help your like PhD research? Like how is that like really benefiting you?
Thank you, Canada. I think in terms of when I go into these areas, and I was talking to Nicole, I'm actually hoping that it's not just, again, the research, and I'm giving it just to the science community, and the 5 other entomologists will read it, and my abuela, but that it's also that we're engaging people in those areas. So it's one thing for us to sit in Newark, New Jersey, and to say, again, please don't cut down those forests because we really like them, they're pretty, and they're great for oxygen. But if the scientists in those communities don't feel like they have any outlet, if they don't have opportunities to continue the research, and if they are not heard in their own lands, that's really detrimental to the conservation that we're hoping to do. So I appreciate what Nicole's doing because it shows kind of the strength within these networks, and that whenever we go down, we always try to work in collaboration with the local ecologists that we can down there, and that if they can take that information, the studies that we do, and give them to their own political bodies, I think that's really the only way that we can work. And here, I hope to do the same thing on that level, that just engage.
Oh, you've got the UN right over there. I mean,
I know. Please listen to it. But and more so, I know that the fight is easy for us to march. Like, we'll be at the Science March this weekend. It's actually my birthday. It's Earth Day.
Hey, happy early birthday. Yes.
But it's easier on my end to feel like I can kind of, write to my legislator or go to those lobbying days, the science lobbying days. But I think a really key thing is the future is to get students, especially students who might not have these opportunities, get them involved as young as possible. So middle schoolers, my professor is really great about bringing in undergrads that would never have opportunities for this. And then they can, be more empowered. It's been a tradition that only certain people in the country will have all the power, and now I think this generation is saying, if we get more of us involved, spread the equity, that's how we get change to really happen. So,
So with your political science background, you're the person that we probably should go to when we want to be able to, talk to our legislatures and stuff, and how best to address them and be able to like give their attention when it comes to science matters.
I think the biggest thing is those days. A lot of them have like citizen lobbying days, when you actually get a chance to come in, at least I felt, and you get to sit down and talk to those legislators.
So like those town hall kind of things?
Yeah, to show up to those. You'd be surprised at how few people show up, and then, the mic is only for a certain
subset of the population.
Right. So if we want to say, well, this election didn't reflect us, or it didn't reflect enough of us because we didn't come out, and we have to come out. Right. We have to be at those events. We have to make our voice heard. We have to have the legislators like actually listen to us. So.
Right. So, to kind of like bridge off of that, because that is one of the things that, since the Science March is coming up, how important do you think it is for scientists to get involved in the political process? Like, should we keep it like completely separate, or do you think there should be a merging so that way, we can help the politicians and, other people to be able to understand and be able to communicate to us? Like, there's got to be some back and forth, right?
Right. I don't think we can be separate anymore.
Okay.
I think, especially if we want to eradicate that stigma where some people think, well, maybe the scientists are just being elitist, or, well, my opinion is just as good as their fact.
Right.
We kind of have to take that leadership role where we can share our science, not in a demeaning way,
Right.
not to say somebody, oh, if you don't understand photosynthesis, that's
the
end of
it
your...
It doesn't mean you're stupid at
No.
all. It means, well, your knowledge base is in something else. Because I know even within science alone, like, if someone is studying something that's just outside my little tiny scope of what I study, like, I could be completely lost.
Like, here, I have no idea what she does.
Right. Like, I understand
Molecular
a few of
stuff
those
is
key words, but, like, if
over
she
my head.
told me to, like, go in the lab and do this, I'd be like, I might be the person who accidentally burns down the building. Oops. And that was just truly,
Don't leave anyone in your lab.
Yeah. Versus, like, if I tossed her out in the middle of the woods with what I do, she might not come back. So,
and she said that. She's like,
Right.
I would never want to go to the field with you guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a completely different skill set. And just the same thing, like, if you're talking with more of the general public and other things, it's, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're quote unquote stupid or dumb. It just means that their knowledge base is somewhere else, but we have to make sure that we translate our jargon that we like to use to the way that someone can understand, because they don't have that years of learning in that particular area. Just like if someone said go run this router through whatever, I'd be like,
no.
Yeah,
Totally.
So
yeah, I think there should be cross-pollination. Yeah, the scientists need to take the lead on the science.
Right.
Or else, we will have people who don't believe it, or who just are completely fine with dismissing it. So, yeah.
Do you find like you're kind of like one of the only people out there who has both like that science and political science, background to things, or is there like a number of people out there that have kind of like that dual knowledge base when it comes to those particular areas? Are you the lone wolf out there?
I am kind of a lone wolf. But I think from my studies, when I studied political science, I remembered one thing that really struck me when there was the feminists trying to get the vote, and there were also a lot of people trying to eradicate slavery. They were kind of collaborating, and a lot of them had said how the personal is political. So I think maybe even if people don't have that formal degree in politics, especially in today's time where a lot of the politics affect a lot of us on a personal level, a lot more people are involved.
Okay.
So there might be scientists who maybe would not have touted themselves a year ago, 6 months ago, even as very political. A lot of people are coming out, and I think it's a good thing to be engaged in our system.
No, I completely agree. Because like, I mean, just being on the Scicomm Twitter feeds and stuff, like it was interesting to watch, like towards the tail end of the election and then past the election too, to see the amount of political talk that was happening in like that science realm, and to see people truly get engaged with it was exciting to see, because if we sit back, people are going to make decisions about funding, like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is where a lot of my lab's funding comes from. If the budget for 2018 goes through, it's going to go from $300 million down to $10 million. There basically goes all of our science, everybody, for the Great Lakes, and that is so important. I mean, there are so many areas there that have been, just completely destroyed, and it's just like, if you don't have the funds to be able to study that,
what do you do?
You're never going to be able to do it. And it's just like, I mean, so like we talk about in like your areas of where like you're studying, if there's not the money to go and study that, what are you going to do? And who's to know, like, are these species here, and do we really need to protect this particular area? That dragonfly might not be there anymore, but like if no one's there to study it because there's no funds, how would you ever know that?
Right, you just
wouldn't. So Yeah. So we definitely need like those people that can talk and like help make sure that that funding is still there, and that's a priority for our politicians to be able to say, all right, we need to make that happen, because yeah, it's, you know, maybe studying bats or dragonflies might not be the biggest, you know, concern for some people, but it has huge impacts down the line.
Definitely.
So
definitely.
Yeah, because like when we were talking with Manpreet earlier, like, you know, she studies this dragonfly up in the middle of the Arctic, and if you look all the way, you know, up the chain of like food resources, that in theory could at some point in time be affecting a polar bear.
Without a doubt.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I love about insects. They're kind of the base. They're the ones that will consume, you know, they're primary consumers. So they're the first ones that consume primary producers, which are plants. And they begin all those food webs. They're food for a lot of things. They eat a lot of things. They take care of a lot of our junk. So, but yes, when people ask, you know, like why insects or why bats or why anything, why study anything, there's good reasons for that. But then again, we have to kind of make that known.
Eventually it impacts you. You might not necessarily see it like right up front, but that line of like impact, it does occur. So like that butterfly moves its wings, you know, way off there, you know, it does impact you at some point in time.
Yeah, but that's where Scicomm is very important. Communication, social media in general. If we can share this knowledge in a way we've never been able to share before, share what's happening to people around the world in a way we've never been able to share, and just care in a way we've never really cared before, I think really, really big things can happen. So I'm hopeful.
So we're just about out of time here, so if you've got any last questions, I know there was a few of them that snuck through that we didn't quite get to, get those in now. And I guess I always like asking people, you know, what was their either like the biggest fieldwork fail, or what was like your most fun that you ever had in the field? So I'll let you pick one of those and which one you want to go with. So,
you know, I have plenty of fails. With,
doesn't every scientist?
The first one was like in the cloud forest, so we were always inundated with rain. But I think maybe not a success, but just a feeling of awe and knowing that I'm in the right place is when I'm in the forest, especially in the tropics. And when you're amongst trees that are bigger than some of the buildings that we have in New Jersey and New York.
Wow.
And you just feel really small, but you know that what you're doing, you're going to try to take it back to a bigger community to preserve that. That feels like I'm paying my debt to the world, right? Like, I felt like there was something bigger than me, and it feels amazing to feel.
Like you're giving back something positive, too. Yeah.
I hope it will be
I
like
mean, that's like what I feel like with Scicomm. It's like, hopefully, like, you know, I'm hoping everyone out there gets to know all the amazing research and the amazing researchers that are doing it, and it's just, you know, I kind of feel like that's like my little contribution, like, back to everyone to, like, help out, because it's like you're making that positive influence for everyone, hoping you make that world a little better place. And it does, like you said, being out in the middle of nowhere, studying your species, knowing like I'm going to help keep this safe and preserved. It's like that's a really neat feeling.
Definitely.
So
I agree.
So, all right, since we're out of time here, if you've got any other questions, so like if you're watching this on a replay later, make sure that you go to Scicomm Monday to send in those questions, and definitely follow along with the Rutgers, NJIT, Scicomm. I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
NJIT,
man, I think it's like coming off so smoothly now that it kind of is
you don't have to think about it.
So follow the Rutgers, NJIT, Scicomm hashtag to see everything that we've been doing, all the broadcast, all the fun of like this awesome Scicomm trip to the East Coast here. Like, I love that, like, just out there is the ocean. It's so nice. And then if you have any other questions, always feel free to tweet me at the Wildlife BioGal handle. So with that, definitely big thank you to Stephanie. This was a great way to end all the broadcast. And if you've got, like I said, any questions for Stephanie and her work or anything with Scicomm Monday, feel free to tweet it in. And it's been a real pleasure talking to everyone today from Rutgers/NJIT. And if you, yes, happy early birthday, yes, for Stephanie, for sure. And then, it's been a great trip, and I really thank everyone for letting me come and hang out with you here. It's a really great community of scientists here, so feel free to keep following along with all the great stuff they're doing. And since they all just learned about Scicomm earlier today, hopefully we'll be seeing more of it on Twitter. So we'll be seeing you guys around, and we'll be back on our regular time next week for Scicomm Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So until then, we'll see you guys later and have a good one.